Trump travels. The president and the first lady visit Ohio to talk to very different audiences. We have the details. Campaigning in Costa Rica, an issue important to Catholics, plays a central role in the country's presidential election. Papal visit. For the first time in nearly 60 years, the president of Turkey is at the Vatican. We have a report from Rome. And lead up to Lent. One Italian city celebrates the days before Ash Wednesday with a centuries-old tradition. On EWTN News Nightly for Monday, February 5th, 2018. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you for joining us for News from a Catholic Perspective. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. President Donald Trump tells workers in Ohio America is once again open for business. He's on a rare joint domestic policy trip with the First Lady, who has another focus. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Wyatt. Ohio has been hit hard by the opioid crisis. The state reports over 4,000 overdose deaths in 2016. Today, the First Lady is bringing attention to that crisis while President Trump promotes his tax overhaul.
When I signed the tax cuts 6 weeks ago, it set off a tidal wave of good news that continues to grow every single day. Before the ink was dry, companies were announcing thousands and thousands of new jobs and enormous investments to their workers.
The White House says Ohio residents will see $8 billion in tax cuts this year. President Trump met with 4 CEOs of state-based companies who say the tax overhaul has allowed them to give their employees $1,000 bonuses. Meanwhile, the First Lady visited Cincinnati Children's Hospital and met with patients and staff who have been battling the opioid epidemic. Ohio has the second highest overdose death rate behind West Virginia. The First Lady was joined by Kellyanne Conway today at the Children's Hospital. She is the White House point person addressing the opioid crisis. Conway says the White House is in coordination with communities across the country, including faith-based organizations that are finding ways to help opioid addicts. Wyatt?
Okay, Mark, so shifting gears now, the government faces another potential shutdown this Friday if Congress doesn't pass a spending agreement. So what does the president want to see in a funding bill?
Today, a White House official reiterated the president supports a 2-year agreement that gives certainty to federal agencies and the military. The official said that leading up to the government shutdown a couple weeks ago, Democrats chose to prefer the interest of people who are here illegally, referring to the undocumented immigrants known as Dreamers, over people here lawfully, saying further, we hope they don't make that decision again. Wyatt.
Okay, and we'll continue to see how that argument plays out the rest of this week. White House correspondent Mark Irons reporting. Thanks, Mark. President Trump is knocking a bipartisan immigration proposal from Democrats Chris Coons and Republican John McCain. It comes as conservative Hispanic leaders urge Democrats to negotiate with the White House.
I've been working on this issue for over 15 years, and I think we have a real chance with this framework to achieve compromise. And this is all about compromise. It means that each party not only is not going to get everything they want, but probably the deal is going to include things that each side is not going to like.
The group, which included Christian and Catholic leaders, met today with White House Chief of Staff John Kelly. They accused Democrats of playing politics, but Democrats say the president is using Dreamers to push a hardline immigration plan. A federal judge temporarily halts the deportation of Indonesian Christians in the U.S. illegally. The court order affects roughly 50 people, all in New Jersey. The ACLU brought the lawsuit after immigration authorities targeted the group. Democrats in the House Intelligence Committee may call for a vote this week to release their memo on the FBI. This report expected to contradict claims made in the Republican-led memo that was released Friday.
If the House Republicans believe they've set the stage for this president to end this investigation, they are basically saying that in America, one man is above the law.
The GOP blocked letting the public see the Democrats' memo last week, but have since said they'd vote to release it. If the committee approves the second memo, the issue goes to President Trump. The Justice Department is asking a judge to dismiss a lawsuit by President Trump's former campaign manager. Paul Manafort was indicted in special counsel Robert Mueller's investigation into possible collusion by Russia in the election. The suit challenges the scope of Mueller's appointment and the authority. The former sports doctor whose serial sexual abuse of girls and young women upended the gymnastics world was sentenced today to a third prison term of 40 to 125 years for molesting young athletes.
The visions of your testimonies will forever be present in my thoughts.
Larry Nassar apologized to the court as part of his sentence hearing. Today's sentence was the third in as many months. The 54-year-old is expected to spend the rest of his life in prison. American troops are starting to leave Iraq.
Hang him! Fire!
It is the first stage of a drawdown of U.S. forces in Iraq since the war on ISIS began more than 3 years ago. It comes after Baghdad's declaration of victory over the Islamic State last year. The remaining soldiers will continue to provide artillery and air support. At least 2 are dead and more than a dozen are injured after an airstrike hits a government building in Yemen. The country has been in a civil war for nearly 3 years, killing more than 10,000 people. The fighting has pushed the Arab world's poorest country to the brink of famine. Costa Rica's presidential election is headed for a runoff, and one issue is taking center stage. With nearly 80% of the ballots counted, Fabricio Alvarado, an evangelical whose political stock soared after he came out strongly against same-sex marriage, captured 24.8% of the vote. Carlos Alvarado, no relation, had 21.7%. He's the only major candidate to support same-sex marriage. The Vatican is barring the former Irish president from speaking at an annual women's event inside the Vatican over concerns about her opposition to church teaching. Mary McAleese is an outspoken advocate for same-sex marriage and the ordination of women to the priesthood. The event will now be held outside the Vatican. The president of Turkey visits the Vatican for talks with Pope Francis. President Erdogan is the first Turkish president to visit the Vatican in nearly 6 decades. The Holy Father met with him during his 2014 trip to Istanbul. Juliet Lindley is EWTN News Nightly's Vatican correspondent. She joins us from Rome. Juliet, what did the Pope and the President Erdogan discuss?
Well, the key talking point was the status of Jerusalem. Now, both sides agree on condemning Washington's move to recognize it as the capital of Israel. Now, they both say that the status quo should be maintained and that it should remain an international city. The two sides discussed how peace and stability should be promoted to maintain stability in the Middle East, and they said that should be done through negotiation and through full respect of human rights and international law. Now, in the final Vatican communique, no mention was actually made of widespread international criticism of Ankara's human rights record. They also discussed bilateral ties. Now, diplomatic relations were instituted in 1960 between the Holy See and Turkey. And on the agenda was also the condition of the Catholic community, as well as the millions of refugees that Turkey takes in on a regular basis.
Sure, so many important issues. We're also hearing there was a heavy police presence there. Can you tell us a little bit more about what was going on?
Absolutely. The city was in lockdown today. More than 3,500 police and security forces were out. The city was very much closed, cordoned off, especially in the Vatican area. Now at Castel Sant'Angelo, the Castle of the Angels, which is just a stone's throw away from St. Peter's Square, right behind us. There was an authorized protest at which scuffles broke out. There were some 150 protesters between Italians and Kurds, and at least one protester received a bloody gash to his head. Now, it must be said that Turkey last month launched a military offensive in a Kurdish-held enclave of Syria on the grounds that the militia are a terrorist organization.
Sure, and there's been a lot of tension between President Erdogan and a number of Kurds in the region in the Middle East. You know, Turkey is a majority Muslim country. It's pushing to enter the European Union. What is the Holy See's position on its candidacy?
Now, ever since 2002, when Turkey began the process of talks with the EU to join, the Vatican has maintained a significant neutral position. Twice it stated its position that freedom of religion was a non-negotiable condition of entry. Now, just for a little bit of background, now 4 popes have visited Turkey. Most recently Pope Francis in 2014, and this visit by President Erdogan here at the Vatican was the first by a Turkish president since 1960.
Sure, it's so interesting to hear about that and to hear about all of the important issues that the two have been discussing. Juliet Lindley, EWTN News Nightly Vatican correspondent. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Wyatt.
American bishops are meeting this week in Washington to tackle issues like racism, immigration, and the opioid crisis. The theme of the gathering is building community, a call to the common good. Activities include advocacy training, lectures, and a trip to Capitol Hill to talk with lawmakers. Joining us now is Bishop David Talley from the meeting here in Washington, D.C. He serves on the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops Committee on Domestic Justice and Human Development. He's also the Bishop of the Diocese of Alexandria, Louisiana. Your Excellency, what do you hope to accomplish with this social ministry meeting?
Well, this is my first meeting. I've come here primarily as the chair of the Catholic Campaign for Human Development, and I want to see how our work is understood by all of the participants here. But also, as a bishop, I want to see the gathering of men and women, young and seniors, together in the social ministry of the church and how we are consolidating our love for the Lord Jesus and how we put the mandate of serving the needs of others into practice.
Sure, and that seems so fundamental. Tell me, what do you say to Catholics who think the bishops should focus on fundamental issues like abortion and the family rather than issues related to social justice? Why is social justice so important?
Well, the issues you mentioned are important, but our focus as disciples of the Lord Jesus, as his missionary disciples, is on the dignity of the human person and every phase of the person's life, from the moment of conception to the last breath of natural life, and everything in between. So this is focusing on the God's gift of each human person and how, as disciples of Jesus, we are called to care for our neighbor.
Sure, and tomorrow, like I said, it's a busy week this week, and tomorrow participants will be visiting lawmakers on Capitol Hill. It's an advocacy day. Bishop, what issues will you be lobbying for?
My brothers and sisters who will be advocating for every issue that touches on our agenda of lifting up the human person. There are multiple issues, life, the dignity of life, the questions of immigration, the question of housing, of racism, all the issues that are part of the social fabric of the country that Christ will bring a healing touch to, we want to advocate for.
Sure. So, like I said, so many important issues that you guys will be talking about. I also want to switch gears here. Bishop Talley, you have a very interesting story of your own conversion. Can you tell our viewers a little bit about that?
Well, like every conversion of every person, it's an extraordinary story. Every one of your viewers know that about their own faith, their faith journey. Mine is very complicated, but in essence it's this. I walked away as best a teenager could when I was about 13, 14 from religion because of racism. I grew up in the segregated South, and though I had great experiences in the church that I grew up in, racism was not talked about. In fact, segregation was talked about as biblical, with one person in particular, and I walked away from that because I had listened to Dr. Martin Luther King, and he spoke Jesus in the way I knew was alive and true. I walked away from faith. I came back to faith in college when someone gave me a book of Thomas Merton, The Seven-Story Mountain. And I read that book, and it was as if he were reading my mind and my heart. And from that, I read everything he wrote and his bibliography. And then I found a priest asking about the Catholic Church and how I could be a member of that church.
Such a powerful story, and to hear the influence that Martin Luther King and so many people had on you, and obviously our faith teaching about Jesus Christ and how every person is made in the image and likeness of God. So powerful story. Bishop David Talley from the Committee on Domestic Justice and Human Development at the Bishops' Conference. Thanks so much for telling us about it.
You're welcome, and God bless your viewers and all that EWTN does for the church.
On Wall Street, the Dow plunges as much as 1,500 points this afternoon, erasing its gain for the year. The market recovered some before closing the day down 1,100. Coming up, Plan of Life. A priest discusses his new book on helping people grow closer to God. And Day of Prayer and Fasting. Pope Francis has a request for the faithful. We'll tell you what it is.
Invito anche I fratelli e le sorelle non cattolici.
Pope Francis launches a day of prayer and fasting for peace in the Democratic Republic of Congo and South Sudan. The Holy Father made the announcement yesterday during his Angelus address. He invites all religious denominations to take part on February 23rd. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. Lawmakers in 12 states have addressed abortion in the past month, with several taking pro-life stances. Chief among them, the Mississippi House passed a bill that would make it the only state to ban all abortions after 15 weeks of pregnancy. In Missouri, lawmakers heard testimony earlier in the week on a bill that would ban abortions after 20 weeks. And the Ohio House is expected to consider bills already passed in their Senate that would require abortion clinics either to bury or cremate an aborted baby. The author of a new book says no one lays on his or her deathbed wishing they had spent more time watching TV, surfing the internet, or working. It's our relationship with God that matters most. Plan of Life, Habits That Help You Grow Closer to God was released this month. And we're joined by the author, Father Roger Landry. Father, welcome back to the program. What is the Plan of Life? I've heard Plan for Life, but what is Plan of Life?
A plan of life is basically a game plan for the most important part of our existence, which is how we relate to God. And so it involves various practices in order to keep the presence of God throughout the day, from getting on up out of bed when your alarm clock sounds to making an examine at the end of the day, looking at how God was present throughout your day, how you responded to those means of assistance He gave you, ask for forgiveness for those times where you were not very alert or didn't cooperate, and then just finishing by saying, help me more tomorrow, so you go to bed with a great act of hope that tomorrow will be a better one.
Sounds like a lot of really good habits. You're here in Washington, D.C., talking at the Catholic Information Center, where you're presenting the book tonight, talking about some of those topics. In it, you write elements of Plan of Life are easy. Living the plan is the real challenge there. So how can we put our plan of life into action better?
It requires a resolute plan and then serious acts of the will. You know, we see in the Garden of Gethsemane that, as Jesus had said to Peter, the spirit's willing but the flesh is weak. A plan of life is a means by which we strengthen our flesh in order to obey that spirit that God has placed within us that wants to help us to become as holy as God is holy. And so it starts with resolutions, which are more than wishes, in which we start working on one thing at a time to unite that aspect of our day with the Lord. And once we start doing that, the positive momentum starts overflowing into all other aspects of the life.
Shifting gears a bit, Father, you work at the Holy See's Permanent Observer mission to the United Nations in New York. I saw you there several months back. Can you tell us about the role of the Holy See at the United Nations?
It's funny, we have a joke that when we're called a permanent observer, that all we're doing is, as spectators, observing what's going on. It's far more than that. We engage in all the debates there at the United Nations, trying to bring in the light of Catholic social teaching to the very actual questions across the world, whether it's the migration refugee crisis, whether it's the battle to defend every human life, whether it's nuclear war and the whole culture that says that the only way we can get along is to threaten to annihilate each other. All other aspects of human dignity, lifting the poor out of extreme poverty, etc. And so the Church has been thinking about the topics that the UN has been debating ever since Jesus founded the Church. And so we have a great experience that we can add to those conversations. We do so obviously in a secular way, not by citing religious texts, but many of the nations there are very grateful for our somewhat apolitical help that's given, because we don't have national interests for the Vatican City State, for example, that other capitals would have for their own nation. And so they look at us as impartial and helpful to keep everybody focused on international common good rather than just narrow, more national interests.
It's so important and will continue to be in the years ahead. Father Roger Landry, the author of Plan of Life, thanks so much for coming in and talking with us.
Thank you for the invitation.
And you can learn more about Father Landry's book and the Catholic Information Center, where he will be speaking at cicdc.org. Up next, Extra Points. We'll discuss the Eagles' historic win. And Carnival in Venice. We'll take you to a pre-Lent party dating back to the 11th century. Ahead of yesterday's big game, President Trump released a statement saying, in part, "We send our best wishes for an enjoyable Super Bowl Sunday. May God bless and protect our troops, and may He continue to bless the United States of America." Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. The Philadelphia Eagles made history, winning their first Super Bowl on Sunday night, beating the New England Patriots 41-33. Coach Doug Peterson gave credit to Jesus Christ and added, quote, "It's all about the faith. It's all about our family, and it's all about the Philadelphia Eagles, and it's in that order. And MVP Nick Foles said, quote, "I wouldn't be here without God, without Jesus in my life. I don't have the strength to come out here and play this game like that." The Super Bowl capped a tumultuous season for the NFL, one full of pregame protests and declining ratings. Joining us now is Doug Eldridge, a sports agent and public relations consultant. Doug, welcome back.
Thank you for having me.
Last night, the singer Pink sang the national anthem. No one knelt. That has been a sign earlier in the season of a sign of protest on police brutality in the United States, racism-related issues. So President Trump has made it clear that he doesn't support people who kneel during the national anthem. He thinks everyone should stand. How do you feel about how that played out? Because, like I said, it did make TV this time. Mm-hmm. Did that, in essence, win the national debate, or was this sort of a refrain from that?
Well, ultimately, the Eagles hoisted the Lombardi Trophy, but I think last night the fans were the ultimate winners. Not just because of a great game, but because we were able to put this debate on pause. I think there's a little bit of issue fatigue, and for just one night, maybe, we were able to focus on the game that's at the heart of all of this.
Okay, so the next big sporting event, of course, we're watching is the Winter Olympics. That's what's coming up in South Korea. You'll be flying out this Wednesday because you'll be helping an assistant for media for some of the U.S. athletes. What can we expect?
It's going to be fantastic. I leave in 36 hours, and I can't believe it. These games have absolutely snuck up on us. But one of the things that really separates the Olympics apart from all of our other sporting pursuits is really the story that leads it, right? This is literally a lifetime pursuit. Last year, Tom Brady won the Super Bowl. This year, he lost. Next year, he has the opportunity to come back and compete for it again. With the Olympics, you wait 4 years. But in reality, you wait a lifetime to even be on that stage. But I think, like you said in the intro, that intersection of faith and sport, I think that's also on display at the Olympic Games. Even one of my clients, Alexa Knierim, they're the national pairs figure skating champs for their husband, Chris. You know, she went through three death-defying abdominal surgeries over the last 14 months. They said she would never compete or walk or skate. Yet here she is, competing on the largest global sporting stage. And what does she say? When my body was at its weakest, my faith was at its strongest. So whether it's the Super Bowl or the Olympic Games, one of the best things that comes out is the enduring faith. In so many ways, I believe that is the mortar that holds the bricks together for these athletes. It's their commitment to faith.
I really admire a lot of those athletes' perseverance through so much. 22 North Korean athletes will be participating in the Winter Olympic Games, and they'll march with South Korean athletes under the unification flag during the opening ceremony. How do you think that will impact the Games, and how do you think sports can kind of play a role in mending political divisions?
Well, I've always believed that sports is the Trojan horse. Sports is the ability to get in the door, and then let's unpack the broader issue. And I mean that in a positive, not a pejorative sense. Now, when it comes to North Korea and South Korea, at a minimum, hopefully, the fingers are off the nuclear buttons for the next 3 weeks, right? Now, the question is whether or not this is substantive and indicative of a commitment to a longer, peaceful engagement there on the peninsula, or whether this is simply a well-choreographed public relations bump and grab by the North Korean regime when the eyes of the world are focusing there on the Korean peninsula. At a minimum, what I think we can credit is the Olympic Games and the global spirit of peace through sport by bringing them to the table. Now, what happens when the Games end? Who knows? But at a minimum, the Olympics has served as the conduit to bring these two sides to the table.
Very good. We'll continue to watching to see how it plays out. And obviously, we've been watching all of the games as well. Doug Eldridge, managing partner at DLE Agency. Thanks so much for talking with us.
Thank you for having me.
And finally tonight, the city of Venice takes part in a Lenten ceremony dating from the 11th century. The Feast of the 12 Marias is a modern depiction of the kidnapping of a dozen brides-to-be in the year 1039. Captured by pirates, they were freed by the city's population. The carnival runs until February 13th, the day before Ash Wednesday. And that wraps up our newscast for tonight. We thank you for watching. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Wyatt Goolsby. We'll be back tomorrow with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night, and God bless.